within an hour. Couple things though, if this were like an intermediate to advanced SQL, we'd probably spend 3 or 4 weeks on triggers because they're important. No.
We were hired somewhere like entry level, we probably wouldn't even be touching this.
Well, you might. It depends on what you're doing. All right, so if you're just pulling data, you're doing like data analysis, you probably wouldn't create any triggers. If you were monitoring and managing a database, then you might create triggers. Because what triggers do is they really are good for enforcing business rules that you can't enforce by the normal structure of the database. So triggers are called triggers. Anybody know why?
Something triggers them?
Yes. And what usually triggers them is insert, update, or delete. So triggers are like, so they're like stored procedures. I'm just putting this there, so it'll be in the notes. Except they're triggered by an event. And the events are almost always insert, update, or delete. Now, depending on the database management system, you might also be able to do triggers on create and drop. And you might also be able to alter. So you might be able to use those as well. But typically, most things that support triggers support insert, update, and delete. And again, they're really good for enforcing business rules. So one of the things you could do with a trigger is, say, like in a library, you had a 20-book limit. When you check out a new book, it would essentially be an insert into checkouts. It would run and check to see how many books you have out. It would do a quick query to see that. And if you had over 20, it would stop the insert, right, and say, you have too many books out. That's something a trigger could do, right? Or a trigger could go and when you make a payment, it could go and see when the due date was and return and tell you whether it was overdue or not. So triggers are really good for that kind of thing. I think the trigger that we're going to do, if you look in the business rules, I think I said, if not, we're going to make it a rule right now, that basically every grant should be reviewed within, I think I said 2 days. I don't know. We're going to make it 2 days. Every grant request. So let's do that. A lot of companies have rules like that, where like everything has to be reviewed within a certain amount of time, or everything has to be handled. They have all sorts of, like a help desk. Typically, the person should be contacted and something should be done within 24 hours or 48 hours. You know, they usually have some kind of metric like that, and a trigger could help. It won't cause it to be enforced, but it could let you know what needs to be done. Does that make sense? So the other thing I'm going to say about triggers in the notes, there are a couple of things. There's after triggers, and there are instead of triggers. There's actually a third type, but it actually behaves the same as after. So, what do you think after triggers do? Considering that they're triggered by an event.
They do something after you try to do a
insert. Right, so they allow the insert, update, or delete to happen, and then this follows after that, right? So it doesn't prevent them. Instead of what you're doing, you intercept these and you do something else instead. Does that make sense? One of the things you could do, I'm not sure it's a good idea, but you could do it like a delete trigger so that whenever a delete happens, you intercept it, you don't allow it to happen. And maybe you put it into a table to consider for an administrator to come and do the deletes later. That would be allow you to have an undo, but I don't think it's a common practice. There are things you could do. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to try to do this. I am going to create, oh, first I want to use Community Assist. The ones we do Wednesday, I will do in Metro Alt. As I said, I'll do the actual assignments there. And then I'm going to do create, trigger, and then we need to give the trigger a name. I'm going to give it a TR extension. You don't have to. It's just a naming convention. I'm going to call it review list, for lack of a better name. And then I'm going to do as. There are no parameters on triggers. Because they're responding to an event, there's no opportunity for you to pass values to them. So there's no parameters for triggers. Does that make sense? So what would we need to do? So this will be, oh, we didn't finish everything we need before the for, before the as. We need to say after insert on what is the table? Grant application, applications. My memory is not good, even on my own databases here. Grant request. All right, so I wonder if I need to do, I probably want to say on grant request first. I'm going to put that up here. And this, I think, is just because I need to go. Yeah, okay. So you want to say what table you're going to do it, and then what kind of, when you're going to do it. Now you can, although we're not going to, you could do like insert comma update. You could put it on more than one event. Right? And I will do it instead of afterwards. We'll do something. But for right now, we'll just do this one. So I want to, this is going to be a pretty simple trigger. Might have to do a second one just to do something more interesting. So we want a, this is for an insert into grant request. And we want to probably, I'm just going to write them into a table. That's probably dumb, but I'm doing it because your assignment can ask you to do that, to write it to a table. So I am going to say, check to see if the table exists. Now, one of the things we could do is we could just write the table, but we're going to write the table if it doesn't exist. If I can spell exist. So I'm going to say if exists. What?
In the comments.
Oh, it should be check. It should just be check to see if table exists. Let's do it like that. So we're going to say if exists, and I'm going to do a query. Select name from sys.databases, or sys.tables rather, where name equals, what do we want to name this table? I'm going to call it to review. So that's our query. So actually, so we want to say if not exists too, because we only want to do this if it doesn't exist. I'm going to begin and end. This begin and end is for the if, right? The curly braces for the if block. What is this not like? Oh, I forgot my as. Okay. I had it there and then I got rid of it. So I am going to create table, and we'll call the table to review. Oops. And we'll do the open and close parentheses. And I don't know if I want all the table insert information there. I'm just going to look at my grant request. Really, we could get by with the grant request key and the grant request date. Do we want anything else in there? Because all we're keeping track of are these are things that we need to review really soon, right? And I'm going to do date to review by. I'm just, as I said, kind of making this up, so we'll see how it goes. I think that's a simple enough table. Again, you could create this table ahead of time and not do this, but since I asked you to do it in the trigger, that's how I'm going to do it. So this is only going to create the table if it doesn't exist. If it does, it'll just ignore this part. So we're going to, these two we can just get from the insert. And there's a couple of things that there are two tables that you can use that are in the temp database when you're doing a trigger. One is the inserted table, which is where any new records are stored before they're actually written to the database. And the other is the deleted table. And the deleted table stores the original version and the new version for any updates or deletions. And you can use those when you're in a trigger because it's all within the process. It's all within the man-on that the temp tables still exist. If you do them as separate statements, you can't use it because once you've done the insert table goes away in temp, right? It's gone instantly. Once you do an update, the deleted table is gone. But we can use these. So I am going to basically, I'm going to declare, I'm probably going to declare more than I need. What I'm going to do as grant key int, declare grant at grant request date. As a date time, and declare at date to review. I'm making variables of these. As just a date. All right. And then I am going to, there's actually, maybe, Do I need all of these? Probably not, but I'm going to do it anyway. All right, select. I'm going to do @grant key equals grant request key. Comma @grant request date. Equals grant request date. All right, from inserted. So we're going to get those from the inserted table. And we're going to assign it to those two variables. And breaking that so it's a little tighter. Does that make sense? That's one way to assign things. So we're getting those from that temp table, from the inserted table, from the inserted values. Yeah.
Sorry, I apologize. Can you kind of explain like in layman's terms, like what's going on in this part right here?
So these are variables,
Okay.
right? And I'm assigning a value to this variable based on the grant request. So the grant request key will be assigned to the grant key. And the grant request date will be assigned to the variable @grant request date from the inserted table, from the temporary table. And then I'm going to do set at date to review, which may not be a good name for that. I'm going to say that it is equal to, I'm going to use a function inside here. I'm going to use date add, and we're going to use day as the increment, and we're going to do 2 days, and then we're going to do grant request @grant request date. You guys remember the date add? It literally is going to add 2 days to the date, right? So the date to be reviewed is within 2 days. So we're getting the date that the thing was posted on the insert, and then we're going to do we're going to just take days. Days is our unit that we're adding, because it could be month, it could be year, but we're adding day. We're going to add 2 of them, and we're going to add it to the grant request date. And then I am going to insert this, insert into to review. And I'll put those 3 fields in there. Grant request key, grant request date, and date to review. And then for the values, I will just do the @ones, the variables. Grant key, grant request date, date to review. Does that make sense? I mean, this is just a simple thing. We're just, when a new thing comes in, oh, date to review by is the actual field name. Okay. There's my as from way back. All right. Let's see if that will go. So it's completed successfully on mine. I want to show you where it is, which means zooming. So if you go to the table, grant request, there is a folder called triggers. And when I open that, we now have our trigger review list. triggers are usually placed on a particular table. Triggers are based on an event that occurs within a particular table. So you can have lots of, each table can have several triggers. A couple of things though, you really, when you're building triggers, which as I said, we're not going to do a lot of it, but in real life when you're building them, you have to be a little bit careful. The triggers don't fire triggers. And some people said if you do it wrong, it can be like popcorn going off. They don't add a lot to the time or the processing time, but you don't want tons of them going off where you don't know what's happening where necessarily. So the way that we get this to actually do something, anybody have an idea? I'm going to lower my zoom for a minute. All right, so it's triggered by an event, right? So what we have to do is create that event. We have to do an insert. So I will do a go, and I'll go down here, and we'll insert into our grant request. And I'm going to just drag the columns in. The way you do that is you just grab the columns folder. We've done that a couple of times. And oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I just wanted to press enter. Just wanted to get it so that and then, I mean, if you grab, just to do it over here again, if you grab the columns folder, you get all the fields. All right, so then we do values. Okay, and I'm going to say get date. So we put the current date for the date. Person key, I don't know. 4. I have no idea who that person is, but they're making a request. They could be a major donor for all I know, but right now they're grant type. This one is for food. Request explanation. Hungry this morning. It's not likely to be given a grant, and they want a good breakfast, so 60. That would be a real good breakfast. Breakfasts are usually pretty cheap. Let's insert, execute. So notice it said 2 rows affected, right? And that's partially because our trigger worked. If we do select star from to review, it will show that it's there. And so we got this on the 4th, and it's due to be reviewed by the 6th. And this is the 92nd request, and it was requested today. Right? And if we were to look, let's zoom up again. All right, so if I refresh the tables, there will now be a table, if I can get down there. So whoa, there it is, to review. Okay. So that's a simple trigger, and that's pretty close to what I have you guys do, except I have you do like some ifs, I think. So let's do one more with like a little if. I don't know what that would be for, but just to do an if statement in there. Are there any questions on that? Let me move this down a little, see if I can get the whole thing on there. Just to walk through, we created a trigger, right? And we gave it a name. We have to say what table it's on and what event. So then there's an as. I'm going to wait to see if this table existed because I'm going to, if it doesn't, I want to add it. Because it's possible after you review everything, you would drop the table. More likely you would just delete the field in it, the rows in it after you've done the review. But there's that, and then once we've created the table, we get the values from the inserted field, and then we insert into this table. You could do it as a temp table too if you wanted. If you knew that it would survive until you could look at it. Does that make sense? Because it might not. That's why I did it as permanent. But you probably would just build that into the design. But I did it that way. Okay, so I'm trying to think of another thing that we could do that would change something. So we've got event, got grant type, got person, person address. You guys think of any? I mean, I could look and see what I did before. I could do a delete one, but that again doesn't necessarily make sense. That doesn't, I don't know if I understand that first trigger. Let's go back a year. Oh, that's actually your trigger, I think. No, I had you guys do a different trigger. The overtime one. It shouldn't show. I'm just trying to think of another trigger that would have a little bit more complexity to it. Can you think of any business rules? Actually, let's look at this. Let's do a quick select star from business. Isn't that what I called the table? Business rule? Yeah. Why does it not like that? Yeah, that was the 48 hours. Oh, you know what could be? This is actually a really complicated one. This is a better one. We could do a request to make sure that it's not greater than the maximum for that. That actually makes sense as a trigger. I was trying to find a trigger that makes sense. I'm not going to worry about the lifetime right now, but let's do this. So let's create a trigger. One of the reasons why these have, I'm not sure why that one has. It just isn't updated. So I'm going to create trigger. And this will be our last trigger, but I'm going to do tr underscore, I'll call it check maximum. And it will be on grant request, so same table. So do we want it after insert or instead of insert? This gets into a problem because we've got one on insert already. We can have another one on insert, but I think I'll do it after. Do we want to let it insert, or do we want to keep it from inserting? All right. I have no idea how these two, and this is where you get into troubles. How these two will interact.
Spell trigger tiger.
I did. So we could have a little tiger there, I guess. All right. We'll see. This will be a good experiment, see how these two interact. All right, so what we want to do is we need to see if the request amount. So I'm going to declare, and I'm just going to call it at request amount. And I'm going to make it, is it money or decimal? It is money, so we'll make it money. And I'm going to declare at max request amount. And we'll do this as money. And I'm also going to declare grant type as int. I'm going to get the key for that. So I'm going to do like couple of queries here. I'm going to query the inserted table to get what they're requesting and the amount. And then I'm going to query the grant type table to see what the max amount is. And then I'll compare the two. And then if it isn't good, then I will probably you'd want to do something more than what we could either write it to a table or just put out a message. Yeah, put out a message. And then if it is good, we will go ahead with the insert. So first of all, I'll do, select at request amount. Equals grant request amount. I'm just going to do at grant type equals grant type key. And then from these we want from inserted. Okay. And then we want to get the maximum. So I'm going to do, whoa. So I want to do select at max request amount. Equals, and then let's look at grant type. Equals grant type maximum. From grant type, and again I'm going to break these. I'm just trying to make it more readable. And then I'm going to do where grant type key is equal to at grant type. Right, because we only are interested in the kind they're actually requesting. All right, so that should give us all the values that we need. So we got the values from inserted, so we know what they're actually requesting. And That should work. Why is it not like? Oh, well, that's grant type key. This is at grant type. Declare ant grant type int. I don't understand because that is declared. Oh well. See what happens. Okay, and then I'm going to compare them. If at request amount greater than at max request amount, and I'll do a begin end. I'm just going to say, kind of like other programming languages, you don't actually have to have a begin end if there's only one command that follows. Does that make sense? But it's a good idea. I'm just going to do print. Couple of things to know. This will only work inside this environment. Like if you were calling this from a web page, this message would not come through. So I'm going to say print request exceeds, that's not how you spell exceed, exceeds maximum allowed or whatever you want to do. And then actually I'm going to do a return there. Because if you don't do a return there, it'll continue on to the next thing. Return will end it. So, and then I'm just going to say else, although I'm not sure I need to say else because really it'll end if it doesn't. So I could just, I don't need an else. Oh well, it doesn't hurt. Else, begin, and we will say insert into grant request, and I'm just going to say select, I don't know if it'll allow this, from inserted. It's going to allow it whether it works or not. I don't know. So with this trigger, what we're doing is we're just, it's going to be instead of an insert, so it's not going to allow the initial insert to happen. We declared some variables to get our things, the different information together. The first two variables come from inserting, right? That's a table that always exists when you do an insert. Then we got the maximum grant type from the grant type table. I do not know why this is underscored. Did I spell it?
It's two
Oh,
T's.
it doesn't have two T's. Thank you. That would have thrown an error when I tried to run it. And then, so we check to see if the amount requested is greater than the maximum amount. If it is, right now we're just printing out a line. Otherwise, we will do the insert. And even though we've intercepted the insert, from within the trigger, I can do the insert. So, and this insert should actually trigger the other trigger. They said it gets complicated, so let's see if it works. And then I'll be done with my showing triggers. I wanted to show an instead of, and I wanted to show one that had like an if. So it does. I knew it wouldn't do that. Now I don't think it will have a grant request key. The thing is, it wouldn't let me do. I'll break that up so it's all on the screen. It wouldn't let me do asterisk. I didn't think it would. That's what the error message is saying. So I'm going to go back up and do it again. I think at least that error will be gone. So it says it's successful. So the way we try this is we do an insert. I'm going to do two different inserts, one with under the amount and one with over the amount. I'll do over the amount first, see if we get our message. So I'm going to insert into grant request. Actually, just to make it easy, I'm just going to do that. Because I'm lazy this morning. All right, and then I'm going to do values. So the date can be get date. Person key, whatever person you want up to. I think there's 131 people. 6. This, it's not necessarily a logical one. What grant type? Let's try 1. So exclamation, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. So 1 is food. Now before I put in the thing, I want to look real quickly down here from grant type. I want to see what the max is for food. So the max for food is 210. So let's make a 250. 75, just for good. So let's see what happens when I run that. Do I get the message? Request exceeds maximum allowed. Now it says 1 row was affected. Did it do any? I think that row that was affected is in the inserted table. Let's do select star from grant request, just to make sure that it didn't go. So it isn't there. All right, our person was 6. Need food. It didn't insert. I am curious though. To review. Did it go to review? No, it didn't go there either. So I don't. The one affected is a little bit odd, but yeah. All right, so let's do this again, but let's lower this to like 100 so that it is. Okay, so this time there's 3 rows affected. And again, I think the first row is the inserted table, right? But if we go to grant request, it should have been written there now. So we go to the very bottom of grant request, and there it is, right? Now that it's 100, it's okay. And if we go to review, because it is a legitimate insert now, it should be there as well. And it is. Right. So it worked. And it triggered, when the actual insert happened, it triggered the second trigger. So this trigger, the first is, and the thing about triggers is that, you know, any insert will trigger it in this table. Every insert will trigger it. And in fact, right now we have 2 triggers triggered by any insert. The other thing is they don't correct anything in the past. So people could have made outrageous requests for far more than the amount allowed in the past, and it doesn't go checking previous records. It's only from this moment forward for the trigger. But these can be really useful. This one at least is semi-useful, right? This one actually might build because you would want to know. You just want to reject outright if they're asking for too much. Probably what you would want is some way of returning this to the web page, right? You know, and something like, sorry, that exceeds the maximum. Please make a smaller request. Okay, so that's triggers. I'm going to give you the rest of the time to work on stuff. Triggers if you haven't. Anything else that you need to work on. Wednesday, as I said, we're going to do 3 different assignments, but we're going to do them together. And we can do it. I mean, none of them are very extensive, and they're all kind of a little bit extra. So come Wednesday and you'll get 3 for 1, right? And have at least 3 of them more done. Do triggers make any sense to you, Ben?
I figured the trigger should have been kind of right after creating tables, because obviously by creating tables, you're providing that there's values and that there's char numbers.
Yeah, these are kind of like the business, so they could be actually, so when you're building these, you probably would build them in, you're right at the beginning. Because first you'd probably build all the table structure, and then you would go through and analyze the business needs and build the triggers that you would need for that. You might also build some of the stored procedures. The stored procedure, though, you have to manually run, whereas the trigger runs automatically. Really, to build a really good database, it's a lot of work because you do need to figure out all the table structure. You need to figure out the triggers that you need for the business rules. You might need to write some functions. You might need to write some stored procedures for security structures, you know, so that people use the stored procedures for updates and deletes rather than directly to the tables. It's a fair amount of work. It's actually one reason why NoSQL is popular now, because you can do go to them without any work at all. You might pay the price later because they have no structure. They have no built-in structure. But if you want to protect your data and if you want consistency, you need a relational database like this. NoSQL is really good for collecting things like social media inputs. Like if you were just gathering data from a lot of different social media things, a NoSQL database like Mongo would be better. Because you can just feed it in directly, and they all have JSON outputs that you can just feed directly into a NoSQL database. Whereas if you were to put it into a relational database, you'd have to shard all that, what they call, they don't call it sharding, they call it shredding. You take all that data and break it into columns and rows. All right, I will post this. The video is there. I will help you as needed. And I wanted to give you time to work because lab times are going to be a little bit less. Monday will be lab, a week from today.
I'm in trouble turning on my virtual machine.
All right, let me look.